Hello Misfits and welcome. In today's video, I am reviewing the Zombie Road RPG by Dragon Mount Press. Now, this game isn't out yet. I was very fortunate enough for them to send me a sort of like a beta version ahead of time, but they plan to launch the Game Found campaign in early to mid-September, so definitely keep your eyes peeled for that. But yeah, in this video, I basically am just going to go through my experiences reading through the core book, my experiences running a game in the system, and just sort of give you my overall thoughts and opinions on this zombie apocalypse TTRPG. You may have also noticed that there is not a lot of things on my walls or around me other than boxes, and that's because I am moving, so just excuse my less than wonderful background. Maybe I'll get everything packed up quickly and we can sort of get back to normalcy soon. But yeah, that's why it looks like that. And for full transparency's sake, they did send me a copy of the game early to review, but they've not, paid me to, express a specific opinion. They just wanted me to give my honest thoughts to you guys, my audience, and just tell you what I thought of the game. So Zombie Road RPG is sort of a zombie apocalypse tabletop role-playing game, but one of the key differences is that you are playing as yourself. This is like the big thing they push, is that you play as your actual self, which is a really, really fun idea. They also encourage you to set the game in a city that you and your players are really familiar with. And this ended up being one of our favorite aspects of the game when I ran one for my players. We really enjoyed being somewhere that we all knew and sort of running down the streets that we're familiar with, and that was a really, really fun part of the game that I really enjoyed and hadn't experienced in a TTRPG before. So up front, they state in the book that they wanted a game that could be picked up kind of quickly. It was a refreshing change from your typical fantasy TTRPGs, and it was something that didn't have to be this like massive multi-year campaign. You could pick up the games pretty quickly, and finish your story within a few sessions and, put it away until you wanted to pull it out again. And this was really, really nice. Yeah, we can kind of get bogged down sometimes with these massive campaigns, so it is nice to have something that you can pick up really quickly and just sort of jump into, and I would say for the most part they have, accomplished that task. My players, they had limited ability to look at some of this stuff ahead of time, and they were able to sort of throw themselves into the game and just go, and it worked, which is really cool. Another intention of theirs is to have a game that has the possibility for a positive outcomes. That's something they state up front, because our own world is super bleak and sometimes our own campaigns get kind of heavy, so they wanted something that could be positive, didn't have to be so dark. So that's another statement that they put up front in their core book. And then talking about sort of the differences between this and other games is that they want this game to be really easy to follow. You can learn it really quickly while it still has some complexity to it, and you don't necessarily have to get bogged down in character creation or world building. They've done a lot of the heavy lifting for you and made things really easy to just sort of throw together in a short amount of time. So these are some of the big statements that they say up front and their intention for this game. Now let's get into just sort of the overall organization and presentation. I think the overall organization of this core book that they sent me is really well done. There's a nice table of contents. It makes it very easy to find the sections I'm looking for. At least in this particular beta version that I got, there is no glossary, which would be like the extra, cherry on top. But overall, I didn't really have much trouble finding the stuff I was looking for. And I just love the presentation. It has I mean, all of their promotional stuff has this too, this really cool art style that's sort of like comic book meets graphic novel. It kind of reminds me of the art style of like the Walking Dead comics. That sort of grungy kind of quality to it, but still these big like pops of bold colors like reds and yellows. I really love the art style. The somewhat cartoony comic booky style lends itself to that, you know, we want this game to be able to be positive and be able to be fun, but the sort of grittier stuff and like, you know, the blood splatter on some of these zombies lends itself to that classic zombie apocalypse kind of feel. So I really love the art style, and it is present throughout the entire core book, and I love that. The way they have set up this core book is that it's for both players and the game master, and they really set you up where the first few chapters are the stuff you really, really need to know. You know, the general rules, how some of these different mechanics in the game work, and then they throw you into character creation and go ahead and get that done. That whole process of reading those like first 2 main chapters, it doesn't take a lot of time. It's pretty straightforward. I also like just the way things are grouped in chapters. I feel like each page of information it's not super overwhelming. Sometimes these like D&D or Pathfinder books will have like, you know, like almost like 4 columns across of information. It's a lot of text thrown at you. It can be a bit overwhelming, and I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I struggle to focus when I am reading stuff like that that's in this sort of textbook format, and I really like the way this is laid out. I feel like there's not too much information on a single page for it to be overwhelming. I feel like I can really, read through the pages and it's fine. I'm not like finding myself getting distracted as I'm reading, which is really, really nice. That's not something that I would normally think about when I am, looking at a book and how it's laid out. So the fact that I noticed that this was better than other things was something I felt I needed to highlight. And honestly, the core book is sort of separated into 2 halves. The first half, everybody can read it. After we get to the character creation section, we get into just the other aspects of the game, surviving in the apocalypse, combat, equipment, gear, that kind of stuff. And then the rest of the book is for the game master, for the GM. This is how you, set up your own NPCs, how you run monsters, the locations you can put into your game, travel, that kind of stuff. So I really like the layout. I like that it's one book for everybody instead of all these multiple books. I feel like it's easy to understand, and it's not like a terribly long manual. The whole thing is about 150 pages-ish. So, it's substantial enough. It is a game, a fully fleshed out game, but it's not so big that you're going to find yourself being overly overwhelmed. So let's talk about the actual mechanics of the game and how they might be different from D&D or Pathfinder or some other systems you might be familiar with. So a key difference with Zombie Road is that it is a D6 system, not a D20 system. You only need one single D6 to make all of your rolls in this game. So that is a big adjustment. Something to note about this D6 system is that whereas in like D&D or Pathfinder, the DCs that you're trying to meet, the scores you're trying to meet in order to determine if you succeed or fail, they are going to change constantly depending on what it is you're trying to do. This is not the case in Zombie Road. There is always a set number for what is a success, okay? So on your D6, a 1 through 4 is going to be a failure every single time. A 5 is a success if you voluntarily suffer a disadvantage. And then a 6 or higher is a success. Now, your character may have bonuses that they can add to the number they roll to make it easier to succeed, or they might have some disadvantages that they subtract from the roll to make it even harder to succeed. So that's something that you're going to have to contend with as you're playing the game. Now, you might notice from the 1 through 4 being a failure, this is a tough system. So it's very easy to fail a roll. Success is, it's hard, and oftentimes it comes at a cost. And this was a big adjustment for me and my table, is just sort of getting our brains used to this sort of different system. And my players definitely notice that this can feel a little punishing if you're used to being, you know, like a wizard in your fantasy game, or a sort of roided out barbarian, you know. In those games, you're used to accomplishing tasks relatively easily. And here it's just not as easy. It's going to be a struggle every time. But I think the intention here is because you're playing as yourself. You're playing as a regular human being, and you probably struggle to accomplish some of these tasks typically. So I think that's why this system is set up as being so punishing, particularly for a level 1 character, because you are just a regular human being and you're trying to survive in a pretty sort of brutal setting. So that's something to keep into consideration. I'm going to talk more about my thoughts and my players' thoughts on this D6 system a little bit later, but I wanted to point out this as a major difference from games that you're used to. Now, there is a big feature that's going to help balance out this D6 system, and that is going to be endurance. So in Zombie Road, your endurance is your health, but it's more than that. It's also your energy, your all-around average state of being, and it's also sort of like an in-game currency that you can sort of spend to help you accomplish things. Let's say you're about to make a roll and you know you're not particularly good at that skill. You can spend a point of endurance to get yourself a +1 to that roll, making it easier to succeed. Let's say you rolled a 5 and you chose to take an injury in order to succeed at the roll. You can spend an endurance to avoid that injury. You can spend an endurance while you're fighting to gain an extra action in combat so that you can do more that turn. You can also spend endurance to make your attacks deal more damage. So you can spend this in a number of different ways, which is really, really interesting. And I like this idea of you're pushing your body to the limit in order to accomplish these different tasks. I really like that concept. I like the way that they handle it. It makes a lot of sense, and it took my players a second to sort of get used to that, but once it locked in for them that they can spend endurance, and you are meant to spend endurance during the game to do these things, it really, really helped, and they got more accustomed to the game system. Now, because you were spending endurance, of course you have to have ways of gaining it back as the game goes on. There are lots of different ways that you can regain your endurance. If you roll a 6, that's considered a lucky roll. You can roll again, and if you get a 5 or a 6, you could get a +1 endurance and get a little bit of health back. Also, there's an aspect of this game that I just love, and it's called tally marks and also the stuff in your pocket. So these are interesting aspects of character creation that I've never seen in any other system. So tally marks are something that you keep track of on your character sheet. And these are things that are really important to you that you keep track of in this zombie apocalypse to sort of help you cope. It's not something that necessarily you encounter or happens all the time, but it's special to you and it's helping you sort of mentally endure this apocalypse. Your tally marks can be keeping track of the people you save along the way. It could be collecting Polaroids of animals that you find as you're moving through the sort of wasteland of sorts. It could be keeping track of the number of books you read in the zombie apocalypse. There are a multitude of things that you could decide to keep track of, but this is something that you mark on your character sheet, and for each tally mark you get a +1 endurance for that. So this is sort of encouraging you to go out and go on these missions and explore the world, and it gives you an opportunity to regain health as the game is going on. Something else that can give you endurance is the stuff in your pocket. So of course there's equipment and supplies that you would have, but there's also just little things that you might keep in your pocket. Things that might have sentimental value to you, things that might be special. It could be a useful item like a screwdriver or a multi-tool, or it could be something really personal, like an engagement ring or a picture of a loved one. You keep these things in your pocket, and if there is some reason for you to pull it out in the middle of the session, you get a +1 endurance for doing that. And I think that's really cool. This is unique to this. I had not seen that elsewhere, and I especially love the tally mark thing. I really enjoyed that. My players really liked that as well. Another thing, sort of like mechanics and system-wise that I and my players really enjoyed was combat. It's relatively fast-paced, and you have a lot of freedom when it gets to your turn in combat. Everybody starts out with 2 actions, but depending on how you've created your character, you could have more actions than others. You can do a wide variety of things on your turn. This is really refreshing to some of us that are used to D&D, where you're sort of limited on what you can accomplish based on like your class. This isn't the case. Everybody can move on their turn. Everybody can choose to attack or aim. Everybody can, swap their gear out or try to stabilize somebody. You have a multitude of actions that you can try to accomplish, and you can also spend your endurance to gain more actions. It just felt like there's a lot of freedom here. It felt really, really straightforward, and we really liked that. Another aspect is the bonuses that your character has. These are like your, ability scores if we're equating it to D&D. But there are 5 experiences that you might have as a character: crafting, diplomacy, medicine, stealth, observation, and then of course you have brains and brawn. And most of your stuff is going to boil down to brains and brawn, and then depending on what is happening in the game, what the scenario is, you might be able to apply some of these other experiences to that. Combat is always going to be a choice of brain or brawn. Melee attacks are brawn, ranged attacks are brain. And these bonuses are always going to be a pretty low number. Brain and brawn at the start, it's only ever going to be like 1. And then your experiences are never going to be higher than 2 when you're starting at level 1. So you're not having to keep track of like these really big numbers like you might have to in other systems. It's pretty straightforward and simple, which is nice. But if you're trying to succeed at the role and the most you can get is like a +2 or a +3, it might be a little challenging. So that's something to keep in mind. What's fun about the experiences and these bonuses is when you are creating your character, which should be yourself, you also get to kind of factor in what your own personal experiences are and how that might apply to your character sheet. This was sort of fun for us because we all sat down and were like, okay, what are we actually good at and how would that apply? So if you're like an engineer or maybe an electrician or, you do a lot of like crafting or woodworking, you might be good at the crafting experience. If you're somebody that has to talk to people regularly or perform or something, you might be good at diplomacy. If you have any sort of like medical background or medical training, you might be good at medicine. And then of course you've got stealth and observation. There's a bunch of different things here, and there's lots of different ways that you could apply your own personal skills to this. Another example is if you are really physically active or maybe have like a military or sports background, you could gain an extra action. So I really love that aspect of it. It was really fun, and it sort of made us just like, oh man, what are we actually good at? Which we enjoyed when we were creating our characters. Now let's talk about the sort of story of the game, the setting, how easy it would be to throw together your own game, that kind of stuff. So the first half of this book is like all mechanics and stuff for everybody, but the last half is for the GM. And this is where it's going to tell you how to create NPCs. It's going to tell you about the different types of zombies. It's going to tell you about the different factions in the world. It's also going to tell you about the different types of locations you might encounter. This was outlined really, really well. It was very straightforward. I knew immediately, what the different zombies could do. I knew immediately what the different factions' goals were and how they functioned. And they did a great job of breaking down the locations, and they pretty much covered everything you could encounter. And for each of these locations, they tell you, the difficulty of being in it. They tell you the types of dangers you might face. They tell you the advantages to being in such a location. They tell you the resources you might encounter. And of course, they tell you what sort of shelters you might come across in those locations. So it's broken down very well. It's easy to understand, and it made me feel like I could throw any of these places into a game without a ton of prep work ahead of time, and that was really, really nice. I think other systems do this, but not necessarily this well or broken down in a way that's this easy to understand, and so I really, really appreciated that. Another big aspect of this game is traveling on the road, and they have a whole section dedicated to stuff you might encounter as you are traveling. And that was really, really cool. These could be, dangers and encounters that you face. These could be sort of like side quests or side missions that you come across and have to go do. These could be just sort of scenes and things that you see that just sort of, set the tone. It could be a variety of things, but they outline all of them for you. You could pick them or you could choose to roll for them. It's up to you. And of course, they have some lore built in here. They leave a lot of things open for you to add to or create yourself, but they do give you a good bit of stuff in case you don't want to, do all the world building. They tell you a little bit about the outbreak. They keep it pretty ambiguous, and they tell you that 10 years have passed. They even give you some examples for what could have caused the outbreak, but ultimately it is left up to you. And of course, they outline sort of the state of the world. What are people lacking that they used to have, How are our man-made structures dealing with, 10 years of this? Is nature taking it back? Is it not? How do other survivors react and think about this? How is civilization functioning? So they do a good job of outlining all of that. And then, of course, breaking things down into factions, how you would create your own faction if you wanted to. And then it gives you just a basic outline of how to run your first game. I feel like they did a really good job of outlining this. I came away from this feeling like I could very easily run my own games in this system, whether I was following their suggested first game mission or not. And that was really, really nice. That's not something that always happens when you come across a new game system. Sometimes you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, but this felt very straightforward. I felt like I understood what I needed to do, what I could do, and that was really, really nice to see. Aside from the core rulebook, you also get a character sheet and sort of like a Zombie Road cheat sheet. The cheat sheet is like everything you absolutely need. So once you create your character, once your players have read through the sections of the core book they need to read through, all they need is their cheat sheet. It tells you what you can do as your actions in combat. It tells you, the different sort of types of distances you might be dealing with in combat. It tells you what happens if you get bit and how that works. It tells you all the different disadvantages, the different experiences, and so much more. It literally has everything you need, and it's really nice to have it all on a single page so that your players aren't getting bogged down flipping through the core book, and you don't have to do that either. You can use this cheat sheet as well. It's extremely useful. I really, really liked this. Now, let's get into my own personal thoughts, and I also, talked to my players a little bit after we ran our game. So we ran our game Sunday night. It went really, really well. So let's talk about that. We really thought the game was fun. We thought it was really easy to pick up. My players, it took 10 minutes for us to throw our characters together. Maybe a little bit longer, but that's because we were all doing them at the same time, and I was trying to talk to each person and sort of gauge, their own individual uniquenesses for their characters. But its character creation is super quick, and all you have to do is follow the book, and it's pretty straightforward. So we all thought that was really, really nice. The system itself was pretty easy to pick up. It just took a second for us to adjust ourselves to spending endurance mainly, and the sort of D6 system. So that just took a second, but by the once we got to break, I felt like we kind of had locked in and figured that out. A big highlight that we really liked was the freedom of our actions in combat. That was something a couple of my players really enjoyed. The idea of spending endurance to get more actions was really fun and interesting. And the combat itself was pretty fast-paced, and my players liked that. We aren't big on long, drawn-out combat, so we really enjoyed how fast-paced this felt. My players also really loved just the general lore. Now, of course, some of that is me putting my own spin on it, but just the way it's set up, it's very easy for you to customize the lore. So, definitely a lot of that is the zombie road doing the heavy lifting, and then, the GM can just sort of add their own flavor on top. Something else I noticed as I was reading through the core book is every part where you might have questions or might start to get confused, they give you a really great sort of dictated example of how these different mechanics work in these different aspects of the game. And that's what a lot of TTRPGs do. You get to a section where it's discussing mechanics, and you're like, I don't know what that is. And then it writes out an example here is Joe, and he wants to try to attempt a roll to attack a zombie, and he's gonna roll this die and add this skill to it. He got this result, this is what happened. So anytime you might be confused, they give you a really clear example that's going to answer your questions. So that was really nice. The biggest thing that my players pointed out was just the D6 system feels really hard on the level 1 player. That's a big adjustment when you're so used to being a powerful character in a fantasy world to go to being a just regular human being and really struggling to succeed at a role. That is tough, especially since a lot of being able to succeed hinges on potentially suffering some sort of disadvantage in order to succeed. So then, as the game is going on, you have all these disadvantages, and these are all these negatives that you are subtracting from your rolls, making it even harder to succeed. And that is tough to deal with. You feel like you have been beaten and battered in this zombie wasteland. Though there are ways of regaining endurance and removing disadvantage, sometimes this depends on a roll as well. So you can just sort of gain endurance by, a tally mark or using something in your pocket. But to remove a disadvantage, you're going to have to use medicine or drugs or bandages, and a lot of these require a roll. Applying a bandage requires an attempt to bandage up the wound, and you could fail at this and not remove the disadvantage, and that can be really frustrating. I think my players really wished that applying a bandage or using medicine didn't require a roll. There were times in which I wish there were types of injuries where, you've got the injury that's inflicted to you by something that's attacking you, a zombie or a raider or whoever. And then there's the types of injuries you sustain from trying to just succeed at a roll. And a lot of times I feel like this is I cut my hand doing a thing, or I rolled my ankle or whatever. So I wish the self-inflicted injuries you could heal with a bandage without having to require a roll, whereas the ones that are inflicted on you by somebody else maybe would require some sort of attempt to see if you're able to bandage that. That was just something that me and my table thought about as we were playing through this game. My players also really wanted it to not be as hard to succeed. They really wished that a 5 to 6 was a full success, and then the 4 was the option of success if you take an injury or a disadvantage. That was something that they said. And as a game master, the only thing I really found myself wanting for was a chapter or section that was outlining how to balance a fight. So we played through the game, and we had kind of like sort of 3 pseudo combat encounters, and I feel like I never quite figured out how many enemies I should have thrown at my players, and I still needed time to learn that, and I wish there was just maybe some more examples on how many to throw at a party in the book. That was like the only thing that I was sort of missing at. I feel like if I gave it a couple more goes, the next time I run a game in this system, I would figure it out. But that was something that I noticed. And something that me and my players observed is while they want this game to have the option of, you know, a positive outcome, it is a zombie apocalypse. So there still are aspects of this that are quite brutal. There's actually a whole, you know, sort of mechanic around if you get bitten by a zombie, and it might result in you having to amputate a limb so that you don't get infected. That's a pretty harsh thing to deal with. So, you know, I think a lot of keeping the game positive and having a more uplifting outcome is really, really dependent on the game master. And how they present the tone of the game. I feel like I worked really hard to inject some like fun and silliness into the game to keep it a little bit more uplifting and positive. But if you're not too careful, it can easily get kind of dark. So it's interesting. I feel like it is open to being interpreted however the game master and the players decide to interpret it. And I do like that freedom, but it's just something to be aware of, that like if you want this to be a more fun, positive zombie apocalypse, you're gonna have to really, you know, take the reins as the GM and make sure that that's what's happening. Overall, we really, really enjoyed the game. I love the art style. I love the sort of vibe that's presented in the core book. I felt like it was really easy to pick up. It didn't take a lot of prep time, which is always really nice for a game master. And my players picked up on it really quickly too. And there were lots of things that we really, really enjoyed. We definitely want to play another game in this system. So you should definitely go check out Zombie Road RPG. Go check out their page on GameFound. I will put links to all of that stuff below. And remember that campaign is launching in early to mid-September, so definitely keep your eyes out for that. Now, I also recorded our full playthrough of our one-shot. I will be releasing that. Now, you're gonna have to give us some grace. There are times when we stop and we go look things up and double check things and try to make sure we're doing stuff right. And we definitely make some mistakes. So, keep all of that into consideration if you decide to watch that. But yeah, I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe. That stuff really helps me out. But more importantly, leave a comment down below. I would love to hear your thoughts. I would love to, see if you've got any questions about this game, this system, stuff like that. But with all of that said and done, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week, and I will see you again next time. I have so much packing to do. So much packing to do. And I also have a lot of painting to do as well. I'm getting there, but it is just so slow. I hate packing. I hate it so much, but I kind of need to get back to it. So I'm gonna let you guys go, and I'm gonna try to be productive. Emphasis on try. Anyway, bye guys.